Have a sense of humor around here.
Coffee, you'll put you in the back of the police.
This is just the facts that have a version of the paper one that they've made.
Yeah, it's the same one.
Yeah.
Hey, Steve,
Same.
we're talking about maybe bringing,
Yeah, so
doing
you may
like
have already approved that.
an update on our consent order and our IWIP for sewer.
Clearly, Lisa.
Maybe doing a little
What?
brief study session
What did I
on
do?
it and
No.
bring Jen in and maybe
I had the
Melinda in.
version, that was the paper version.
So it doesn't have to be next week, but
It's already been
in the near future.
Do I have to just
Don't
send this
have
one
next
out?
week, the week after that, we already
Okay.
got quite a bit going on, right?
Well, I'll get together with you in July then.
I'd say maybe the week after that we can do it.
Okay.
Can't see that far.
Oh.
Yeah. We should.
Whoever did it last time,
Wasn't it me?
wasn't me, basically on six, and ordinance, I would explain all of them, but who did, I don't know who did it, one of those two. Anyway,
That's it.
Do what?
Thank you.
the East Commerce.
It was
Drive
right
ordinance.
there.
We were
East
both
Commerce.
figured.
Basically, nothing's changed.
I made
Nothing
that.
really to
If
say.
anybody cares, I made that.
I can take it, I don't care.
I made notes for myself about what it was. Yeah, I'm gonna just do what you did. Same as last week.
You know,
Good. Get geared up for re-election.
How are you doing this evening?
Correct.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That was quick, wasn't it? It went fast.
There's no
Where's she,
snow or
Mariah?
wind chill
Ryan.
factor, so
Ryan, okay.
So
The Jubilee parade is a week from Saturday, so Dad's driving the pickup and you march behind. Stand back there and wave at everybody, and I got signs going.
all right, we're getting underway in just about a minute.
Dog and pony show
See if
already.
Mr. Halberg shows up.
America at its best.
We'll probably in Brian like 4 times a week for the gas company up there.
Yeah, I'll let you know. They moved their building out of downtown or their office or somewhere else. It's a nice place.
Well, it's made a little easy on
Not convenient.
The city offices.
The Ryan offices?
I'm ready whenever you want to schedule it.
They're all, they'll have gas, get all new stuff. And they got this list of things they're selling, like
10,
filing cabinets, they're selling.
9,
sofas,
8,
You know, and stuff like that. I'm like, damn.
5.
Pick it up, what you do with it. Call Aaron Howell. I saw him chasing a garbage truck today.
Good evening and welcome to the Defiance City Council meeting for tonight, June 8th, 2021. Before we get underway, we usually open up in prayer. Would you bow your heads with me? Heavenly Father, we thank you for the weather and we thank you for the opportunity to gather together, for lack of masks and for the items that are in front of us this evening. Lord, please equip us with wisdom and patience. Lord, please give us insight by your Holy Spirit to do what is right and pleasing to you and for the benefit of the people who are trusting us to do just that. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
I'd like to call this meeting to order. Please let the record show that all members of council are present except for Mrs. Crutch, who gave us the heads up that she wouldn't be here this evening. I need a motion to excuse her.
So moved.
It's moved in a second.
Second.
Mr. Hancock, all those in favor of excusing Ms. Crutch from the meeting this evening, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, we'll excuse Mrs. Crutch this evening. Would you stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I reviewed the index minutes for our previous city council meeting on June 1st, 2021. Do we have a motion to correct or amend the index minutes as they're presented? All right. Without any, I will approve them. And this evening, we have a finance and budget meeting.
I'd like to call the finance meeting quarterly report and also fee cemetery rates to order. And John, would you like to take over, please?
I would, thank you. So let's see, I've handed out, I think you've got 8 pages in front of you. Go over them as quickly as I can, but to be honest, it's going to be a little longer than my normal report. Same pictures or same sheets are up on the screen. You've got hard copies in front of you. One thing I will promise is I'm not going to go through a detailed 15-year history of where we are, but it is interesting to note that part of the message tonight is going to be that the city of Defiance, like a lot of other cities in Ohio and across the country, are sitting on as much money as they ever have in their history. And that is certainly the case in the city of Defiance. That first chart you're looking at is really just for kind of infotainment. Goes back 15 years. The city of Defiance had general fund balances of a little over $4 million at our last peak. That was pre-recession, the Great Recession from 2007 to 2009 technically. But the effects of that carried on in the city for a number of years. The red line in the middle of the chart marks the date at which we implemented our tax increase from 1.5% to 1.8%. And as we've mentioned in here numerous times, that coincided with, literally it coincided perfectly with a real turnaround in the economy as well. So we got the benefit of the additional tax revenues from the rate and additional tax revenues from kind of a booming economy that has gone on since the beginning of 2014. Balances in the general fund actually bottomed out a little bit below $1 million, which was the direction we were headed and why we pushed for and suggested that the 1.8% tax was going to be necessary. It's panned out as well as any of us could have possibly hoped. Interestingly, in 2018, 2019, general fund balances had peaked again, just over $4 million, started to level off, and then COVID hit in March of 2020, which starts the blue shaded section on the right. When Governor DeWine first made his announcement about the impacts he thought this might have on the state of Ohio and its budget, he was calling for state agencies to reduce their budgets by 20%. Clearly, they were anticipating up to 20% in lost revenues. And we carried that message into this room. We discussed it here. We implemented a hiring freeze. We told divisions to not spend money that wasn't essential to be spent. And it just didn't pan out that way. We started 2020 with a general fund balance of about $3.2 million. We ended 2020 with a general fund balance of almost $4.5 million. Income tax revenues did go down in 2020. And the reason I bring this up 6 months later is because we really never talked about the year end 2020. So income tax revenues were down for the year 3.5%. We were projecting as much as 10 earlier in the year. But then on top of the better than hoped income taxes, we had $600,000 come to us from the Bureau of Workers' Comp as basically a gift. went to municipalities and businesses across the state. And in direct response to the pandemic. We also received over $1.2 million in CARES Act funding. We spent a couple $100,000 of that on computer equipment, health-related items in the fire department, EMS squad, and ultimately used something along the line of $1 million of that for fire and EMS wages, which were allowable by virtue of the fact that by pandemic definition, the nature of the work of that entire force had changed from what was originally anticipated in the 2020 budget. So a real kind of a technicality, but it did allow us to use CARES Act funding in that regard, and that literally freed up funds in the general fund, which now we're more or less free to use as we choose. So 2021 has been the same trajectory. The last couple of lines there on the right-hand side, our fund balances now exceed $5 million in the general fund alone. Citywide, we're sitting on about $22 million. 2 years ago, that number was 17,000 or million. So it's crazy. It hasn't had the impact on income taxes, on our fund balances, on our water fund, on our sewer fund, like we had anticipated. So all of that is obviously super positive. We have to bear in mind, though, that it's not an ongoing revenue stream. These are one-time revenues that we're going to be able to use in one way or another. We'll have plenty of discussion on. And then it'll be gone, and it'll be back to more or less business as usual. So with that, I'll ask Lisa to flip to the next page, which is kind of kick off my normal discussion of our current finances. You've seen this sheet multiple times. And we'll go right into income taxes. So far in 2021, income taxes through May are up almost 25% over this time a year ago. That's crazy high. Part of the reason for that is because in last year in 2020, our normal income tax due date is April 15th. April is the single largest revenue month for the city in a normal year. In 2020, because of the pandemic, that due date was bumped back to July 15th. And in 2021, this year, the date was delayed from April 15th, but only to May 15th. So what we're seeing in 2021 is we are seeing the big revenue month of the tax due date, which in this case was May. But doing a year-over-year comparison, I don't have, the big revenue didn't hit until July of last year. So I'm not going to have a real good apples-to-apples comparison until the end of July. But that being said, if I go back to the end of April of this year, which would be 4 months of apples to apples compared to the year before, we were still up 13.8%. I mean, these are huge numbers compared to what a normal good year. We're up 3-4%. So again, I'll hold my total enthusiasm until the end of July, and we see where we are with a more accurate comparison. But again, all things are very positive at this point in time. Middle left-hand side, general fund expenditures year to date, almost identical to where we were a year ago at $4.4 million. And again, on the lower left-hand side of the chart, general fund cash balance, $5.3 million at the end of May. That little graph is 3 years worth of the same 15-year graph you saw earlier. Quickly on the water fund and sewer fund, upper right-hand side, water fund operating revenues up 12.6% year over year through May of this year. That would be more than we would have anticipated based on rate changes. Council might recall we adjusted water and sewer rates at the beginning of 2020, and 2020 was the year we had kind of a significant bump in water rates and a kind of a significant drop in sewer rates. The net effect on most customers was very minor, but it was designed to beef up the water fund revenues and quite honestly cool down the sewer fund revenues. And I would say that we've achieved that. These numbers are, other than the water being a little higher, what's happened in the water and sewer funds has been totally expected. Sewer fund revenues down 1.9% compared to the water fund revenues up 12.6%. Really very reflective of the way we set the rates a year and a half ago. On the lower right-hand side, you can see in that chart, the chart form of those two numbers, and very stable, very much stabilized. We needed to beef up the water revenues and cool down the sewer revenues. Like I said, I'm repeating myself, but that graph is a perfect representation of what we had intended to do with the rates we currently have in place. The only, there was a small blip a year ago in the blip downward in the gasoline taxes that help fund our streets department and some of the paving we do. That recovered very quickly, even in the middle of last year, and those numbers are still strong now. And the only fund that really took a negative impact throughout the entire 2020 period was the hotel motel tax. Fairly understandable, and we're looking for that to turn around and recover within this year. So we'll see how that goes. The next page is really, I'm not going to go into hardly at all. It's really just for information. It's the numerical data that goes behind some of the charts on the page that we just went over. It is interesting to note in the income tax, you can see year to date 24.8% up. That's upper right hand side. But a month prior, just like I had explained, we were up 13.8% without trying to wrestle with those differing due dates. General fund revenues overall up 14.5% for the year. Even before the tax, they were up 8.9% at the end of April. And then the numbers that we talked about for water and sewer, but all that detail that drives those charts is in this page, and I'll move on from it unless there are any questions. So kind of the bottom line on the normal financial report that I would provide is everything looks good. Possibly better than ever. We'll see for how long. But I did want to touch on a topic that is timely and not quite exactly like what I normally go over, but in 2021, as you're all aware, the CARES Act money is done and over. The administration and the Congress had passed a new plan called the American Rescue Plan Act, which we know as ARPA. That would be the latest round of federal funding that the city is to anticipate receiving its share of. Defiance will receive up to $3.26 million. Because we're a city under 50,000, we're not going to get that money directly from the federal government. We're going to get it from the state of Ohio. The state is currently working on the application process. It's not as though you can be turned down, but you do have to ask for it and then they send it to you. What we'll get is 50% of the total amount that's owed to us or being given to us. And then the 12 months after receipt of the first half, we'll get the second half. So roughly $1.5 million should be coming our way soon, and another $1.5 million in about a year. The guidance that was released a few weeks ago was quite specific in eligible uses of the funding. I've heard other finance directors and people comment that it sounded so broad compared to CARES Act money. My first take was that it seemed more restrictive. no point in arguing it. I think it's still a little bit, I think it's quite a bit restrictive compared to what ultimately ended up with the CARES Act money. Really, when CARES Act opened itself up to regular wages for police and fire, it really opened up almost every option imaginable. And I don't see that language in the ARPA funds. I don't see that we're gonna be able to pay regular fire wages to free up all that general fund dollars like we did last year. The eligible uses included, and they're listed here, direct mitigation and prevention of COVID. Seems kind of dated at this point as the sense is we're headed right out of this thing, but that would be the number one purpose of the funding. Allowable use also includes assistance to businesses and nonprofits who have been adversely affected. That's very similar language to what was in the CARES Act program. I believe the county pursued an avenue like that for some businesses. The city did not, which is totally fine. Premium pay to essential workers. In the government sector, essential workers are pretty clearly defined as public health and safety. That would be EMS, fire, and police. Not to be confused with regular pay. This would be if we chose to do bonus pay to these employees. Again, not suggesting we do or don't, it's just one of the eligible uses, but the contrast is that it does not say regular pay, premium pay only, bonus pay only. There's an infrastructure component to the ARPA funds, again, strictly defined. Sewer infrastructure projects that meet the guidelines, that would otherwise meet the guidelines of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. Water infrastructure projects that would otherwise meet the guidelines of the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program. I don't know exactly what those guidelines are. I trust maybe Melinda Sproul does, but that's not the point. The point is that you can use it for water and sewer infrastructure, but not without strings attached. They have to be able to meet these qualifications, the guidelines, whatever they are. And we'll sort that out. The third area that was approved for infrastructure specifically was the expansion of broadband into underserved areas. We've talked about broadband internally. I know the county has talked about broadband. We've talked about it 100 times. I'm not sure any of us exactly perfectly understand what the problem is. So we certainly don't know what the solution is. But that's a
How many times?
100,000. So that is an allowable use of the funds from an infrastructure standpoint. The last item that I have in here, and don't misunderstand, there are other eligible uses, but these are the ones that are relevant to government and local government. The revenue recovery is one of them, is an important component of the ARPA funds, and there is a formula that they put in place. And based on that formula, which basically says the revenues from our own tax sources, which primarily is our income tax, I'm trying to figure out whether a hotel and motel would be included in that as well. But from our own tax resources, we are able to take what we took in 2019, and the formula says add 4.1% to that, and then subtract what we actually collected in 2020. And that would be money we could use. Those are ARPA funds we could use to pay ourselves back for lost revenues. That number is about $830,000. So that's a big number and a valuable and important number to know and keep in mind as we go forward talking about how to use this money. That would be what would end up being more or less money we could use for anything we want. $830,000. Items that the grant or that the funding cannot be used for, cannot be used as matching funds for any federal grants that we might receive or have in play now. It cannot be used for infrastructure, and this is very clear in some of the literature I've received, cannot be used for infrastructure that is not directly addressed by the ARPA guidelines. And the ARPA guidelines are water, sewer, and broadband, as I described. So the things that would be not allowable would be things like sidewalks and paving, unfortunately. Can't be used for outstanding debt, can't be used to sock away for rainy day funds. That's the current guidance as it is, subject to change. Interpretations were ongoing through the course of the year under CARES Act, and we'll see how this plays out. But I think the prescribed uses are pretty clear, and we'll have a lot of discussion about how best to use maybe the 830,000. Anyway, there'll be a lot to talk about, and I think I put out a communication to council earlier this week. Was it just yesterday? Or was it maybe Friday? I don't remember. I put out a communication suggesting that you all might consider an executive session this evening to talk about some economic development issues, and some of this may play into that. That's about all I can say about ARPA for the time being. I wanted to change gears and go into what would technically be the next part of what we're supposed to talk about, which is fees and cemetery rates.
John.
Which take me to the next page here.
Josh?
Yes, sir.
One question. For the ARPA for 2021, we're looking at 3.26 million.
Mm-hmm.
What was the amount for the 2020 CARES Act that we received? You may have already mentioned, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, you'll fall out of your chair. 1.2 million.
Okay.
We're slated to get 3 times what we received last year, and last year was astounding what we received. So crazy.
Thank you.
Quite honestly, just crazy. I might be the only finance director in Ohio calling it crazy, but I don't think so.
Just repeat, Mr. Hancock, that we'll get half of that 3.2 later this year and the other half a year later, which John mentioned.
Basically 2 installments.
Right.
Right. So on the fees in general, this is a project that was started, at least a couple of years ago. Maybe even David Williams might have still been here. A transition between David and Sean. I think that Jeff Leonard and Christy Feeney have time in this, and I have some time in it. The city has a multitude of fees. Fees for shelter rentals, fees for the pools, fees for the cemeteries, fees for electrical licenses, plumbing licenses. And for the most part, we'll talk about cemetery later, but for the most part, these things haven't been even looked at in years. They're all over in the code. They are challenging to keep track of based on how they're scattered in the code. So the effort was put forth a few years ago to try and not only pin them all down into a single document, all the fees listed. Sounds so simple, but it's kind of a pain in the neck to pull it together, as Christy would attest. We need a mechanism where these fees can be reviewed efficiently and in kind of a single meeting, a single discussion, recommendations made if they need to be adjusted at all, and then a mechanism where in an ordinance or an amendment to the code, it can be done in kind of one fell swoop. But even if you want to change one fee out of 90 and leave 89 of them alone, we could still address them all and reaffirm the rates on the other 89. It's done in one spot, in one ordinance, maybe annually, maybe every couple of years, whatever that case may be. Right now, it's it's unmanageable in terms of reviewing them, making recommendations, how often they should be adjusted. Again, I think we will find, and when we bring these things to you more formally, that these things can be 10 years old, 15 years old. There might be rates in there that are 20 years old. They just don't get looked at. Shame on us.
If you want an example, recently when we were meeting with a retail developer here and in a meeting, and it was mentioned that they would have to pay the water and sewer tap fees, and somebody asked about what those tap fees were, and Melinda's answer for one or the other was $50. And she said 50. And the guy said, 50,000? She said, no, $50. And he said, oh, well, he said, the last job we did was, the tap fee was $10,000. We're not suggesting a $10,000 tap fee, but we aren't suggesting that $50 is probably.
He said, I'll take 10 of them.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for that. We'll get to the bottom of it relatively quickly. It's taken a long time. And maybe it's something that's appropriate to address and bring about when we start talking about the 2022 budget. And anyway, probably worthy of an annual review, even if we don't make adjustments on an annual basis. So specifically to cemetery rates, cemetery rates were last adjusted in 2010. We made an attempt to raise the rates in 2014. I believe council passed an ordinance to raise the rates, and it was a significant rate increase. And that was met with a lot of opposition, and quite literally, it was defeated by the public in a referendum petition. So the rates remained unchanged, and they still to this day remain the same as they were in 2010. We're now 11 years later. I'll get into that a little bit more, but what this chart is showing you, and really the only thing that matters on here is the red line across the bottom. This would be since 2009, so I tried to incorporate the rate increase in 10 and then all the years since. The revenues related to the cemetery lot sales and interments, and then the expenditures to operate the cemetery. It operates at a loss every year. Perfectly fine, perfectly understandable. It's a normal kind of a function of a governmental operation. It's supplemented by the income taxpayers, and that's fine. I think in 2014 we sought to correct many years of maybe undercharging, and we tried to do it in one fell swoop. We were doubling and even more the existing rates in 2014. Now, there was a pretty comprehensive study of competing isn't really the right word, but competing cemeteries. We found that there are many that charge significantly more than we do for lots in particular, and for services. I looked this morning, the average cost of a cemetery lot in the state of Ohio is a little over $1,000 right now. Now that can include private cemeteries, public, they don't make the distinction, but a little over $1,000 for a lot in the state of Ohio is the average price. So anyway, the point being, it's always going to be subsidized. It's always been subsidized, but this is interesting because from 2009 through 2014, the operation of the cemetery was subsidized roughly $150,000 a year. And from 2014 on, something changed in 2014, and I'll tell you exactly what it was. 2014 is when we stopped using free labor from the CCNO force. We used a lot of prisoner labor in the cemetery for mowing and weed whacking and all of that for years, and at no cost. In 2014, for numerous reasons, we got away from using CCNO labor, and to this day, today, I'm not even sure it's available. But we had to supplement that free workforce, that free labor, with seasonal pay. And so in 2014 and on, our personnel expenses went up in the cemetery. And you can see that now, since then, from 2015 and on, the subsidy from the taxpayers to operate the cemetery has gone from $150,000 a year to more like $250,000 a year. And we haven't made any rate adjustments of any kind now since 2010. 2020 is kind of an anomaly on this chart. That deficit drops way down. because of COVID, we had hiring freeze. We did limited hiring of seasonal employees, and in fact, the cemetery was down a full-time employee, and we had a hiring freeze in place, so it did not replace that person in 2020. Otherwise, it holds that we bumped the share of income tax subsidy to the cemetery about $100,000 a year. That's the whole point of this graph. These expenditure numbers don't include the expansion efforts that have taken place at the cemetery. If you remember, a few years ago, we developed the Tecumseh Ball Field area. That was about $115,000. That added about roughly 800 to 900 grave sites to the cemetery, which had, prior to that, the capacity of the cemetery was about 16,000 sites. We added 800 with the development of Tecumseh Ball Field, and we have another area that runs along Bassard Drive that would add about another 800. That's yet to be developed, but point being that we have limited space. We're going to run out one of these days. Does the 1,600 and now maybe 1,200 left? There's lots of going like crazy in this Tecumseh Ball Field area. You can see it before our eyes filling up. A decision is going to have to be made at some point. Do we buy more land? Do we stay in this business? Do we get out of it? Do we develop a new cemetery? Those are questions that we'll have to deal with at some point down the road. But for now, we're selling about 65, 70 lots per year. In 2020, we sold about 110 lots. Interesting of note, in 2014, when we were having the discussion on the rate increase, and it was, again, a significant rate increase, we sold, again, these are really rough estimates in numbers because I'm just dividing the cost by the dollars, and there are multiple different rates, but more along the lines of 200 lots sold in 2014. It was a rush. It was a rush on lots to beat that rate increase. Typical revenues might be $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 a year. It was about $60,000 in 2014 from lot sales. Anyway, I think we need to have, we think we need to have a discussion on cemetery rates again. I think we need to take a vastly different approach than we did in 2014. In 2014, we were trying to catch up with cemeteries that we thought we were competing with. Again, wrong word, we're not competing, but you know what I mean. Now, I think we just need to accept the fact that we can't, maybe the point would be to get back to a stable level where we're subsidizing the cemetery at kind of a set amount or a set percentage of operations. So I have before you, and Lisa could flip to the next page. I've got 3 sheets that relate to cemetery funding. None of these are official proposals from the administration or anything. It's really just to start a dialogue. The first page is the current pricing. Again, same pricing we've had in place since 2010. Page 2, which is just an alternative, takes basically each one of these services and each one of the lot prices and increases it $25. That could be a little less than 10%, a little more than 10% in most of these areas, as opposed to 100% and more that we were talking about in 2014. Much more modest, much more in keeping with cost of doing business, and so that's an option. Another option, it would be on the 3rd page, and in 2014, one of the things we had recommended and in fact passed was reducing some of the quantity discounts that are available when you buy lots. I think we noted back in 2014 that of all the cemeteries we investigated, Defiance was the only one that offered a quantity discount, a bulk discount if you bought more than one lot. And as the pricing stands now, it's considerable. You buy one lot today for $375 if you're a resident of the city. If you buy 4 lots, you're paying a little over $250 a piece. It's a $125 discount per lot on an already pretty low cost. So the third option, again, there's an infinite number of options. The third option to consider or think about would be the same $25 per service increase across the board, but on the grave lot sales, we have a price for 1. We have a discounted price for 2 for presumably a husband and wife, a couple. But then beyond 2, there's no more discount. It'd be $325 per lot for a resident, whether you buy 2, 3, 10. The discount seems out of whack. There's no less legwork that has to go into processing the paperwork or anything else. It's just, I'm not sure that the discount, a bulk discount makes sense. And again, to repeat myself, we couldn't find another cemetery that does that. Just some ideas. I'm not looking for answers. I'm not looking for anything other than we think we need to raise the cemetery rates. We think this is a modest approach. We'd welcome any input. Look over the numbers. Give us your ideas if you have some tonight or in the next week or 2 weeks, or it's really just to start a dialogue, because we can't just let it go. We can't go another 10 years without touching them. It's just like all the other fees we just talked about. You have to address them on an ongoing basis.
The only thing I want to say that, John, as well as the cemetery was maintained this year, do we really need them extra people or the other full-time person?
The answer to that is yes, because I can tell you on occasion, we've actually brought people over from Parks and Rec and actually supplemented the work. Those numbers could be even more of a difference, because the fact that we have on occasion taken our workforce, especially during the month of May when it's rainy or whatever, and to get that cemetery ready. And those numbers don't reflect that.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
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 Because I know it wasn't let go by any means,
Right.
This year, the cemetery has been maintained extremely well. Mr. Waxler, the reduction in labor force was in 2020, not 2021.
I know, but I just mean we've never let it go, and that's why I was curious.
It's sort of like all hands on deck. I can tell you that the different divisions and the workers know that when it comes to May, that they know they're going to be over there, and they know they're going to have to help out and supplement the work.
Any other questions for John? Need a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
No,
No, I won't.
we don't adjourn.
We don't adjourn it, okay. Thought we did.
Mr. O'Donnell can explain.
No, since this is just a liaison report, it's during the regular council meeting. There's no need to adjourn.
Thought we did. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So we'll just say thanks, John.
Yeah, I'm done.
Thank you.
Yeah. We used to. Okay.
With that, do we have any comments from council?
I have
Mr. Corbett.
a couple items tonight, Mr. President. I have received a constituent call on some property at 416 Highland. The call I got was about a car sitting there full of junk. I went by there tonight. There's already a nuisance violation there, but I think it's for the grass. It's over knee high. But the car is full of stuff. I don't know if it will run, but I know you can't get in and drive it, and the plate's expired because you can't get behind the wheel. So I don't know what the outcome would be for that, but I also don't know how long that grass stays that way before we intercede, because it looks hideous.
24 4 hours, 48 hours?
I can follow up with our nuisance control and see if it's on their list.
Need the hay baler now is what it
Status,
is. It's
yeah.
that bad, so.
Nope, I can follow up with that.
Thank
That's
you.
416?
416 Highland, yeah.
Okay.
I got one more, Chris, I'm sorry. I got a call from another constituent tonight, this afternoon, about obscene signage in a person's yard. Concerned about our grandchildren having to look at that vulgar language. I understand we're in a very contentious political time frame right now. I know that we have a First Amendment right to express our opinions, but I also know that people have a right to enjoy their property. They shouldn't have to be concerned about their kids being subjected to that. There's probably other ways to express that opinion with different verbiage that's not quite so offensive. I don't know if there's anything we can do about it or not, other than to just ask for common sense and remember we're in a community that we need to respect each other. Maybe that's all we can do is ask for that kind of cooperation and just remember it reflects on Defiance. I don't know if there's anything we can do about that either, so that's out on Tarrawanda, South Tarrawanda.
I think if you follow up with Mr. Sean and myself, what we can do is, I know there's some language that's just obscene and not allowable. So if you're talking in those terms, I think.
In my opinion, I am.
Well, that's the question, and I think that we'll have to look and see exactly what we're dealing with.
Generally, when that language, Mr. Corporate, amounts to like an imminent threat, that's when we can step in and prosecute. Some of the foul language that's come up before, I think I know what property you're talking about.
Right.
And I agree with you. I think the best thing is to appeal to common sense, and hope it doesn't elevate.
Grandmothers can get kind of testy. So
Yes, they can.
too.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Corbett.
Thank you.
Mr. Engel?
I also got a couple things, and I agree with Mr. Corbett, because I think I know what signs he's talking about. I think I've got one in my neighborhood. There's quite a few around town, and I think it's pretty bad when you gotta express yourself like that when there's kids around and stuff like that. It's, like I say, I don't know if we can do anything or what we can do, but I don't think they should have that stuff, not now, especially that type of language that they're doing, so. And another thing, I've had some citizens call about spray for mosquitoes. Are we still gonna maybe do that? And they said they haven't come down like Beatty Place, and they called the city or called somebody about it, and they said it's a private drive. They don't go there anymore, or can't go there, and they said, and this citizen said, well, you've been there before and sprayed it, but they haven't been around there. Nobody's been in my neighborhood that I know of. I didn't know if we were gonna keep doing that this year or what
We're gonna keep
have.
spraying. I'll find out from the service department exactly the schedule.
Okay.
Send it out to council, and maybe even we'll put a Nixle alert, or we'll put it on Facebook.
Okay. Appreciate it.
I noticed they
I
are.
believe they've already sprayed. They were spraying on Jefferson, I believe Sunday night, and they were spraying down through, so I know that there's some going on.
I wasn't sure we were able to get to it with the water issues, so.
Right. Thanks.
Mr. Waxler?
I know, was it last week we had the discussion on the cats, or the week before? Last week, because I had a lady call me about someone Daughter Street there, and I wasn't sure where we left at or what we were doing, or.
I was gonna talk about it, Mr. Waxler, when it was my turn.
Okay, well then, I'll let you talk about that. That's all I had.
But, thanks. Any other comments from council? No? All right. There's nothing on my desk this week. Mayor McCann?
Thank you, President McMaster. I think I'll talk about cats. So I volunteered last Tuesday after we did talk about it to reach out to the Fort Defiance Humane Society, specifically Lisa Weiner. And I did have a conversation on the phone with both Lisa and Stacy Federke, who's I'm not sure of Stacy's title.
Humane agent.
Humane agent. And we had a good conversation. They thanked me for the call. They're more than willing to come in and have a conversation with council. And I think I would kind of recommend that we consider setting up a time here in the next month or so to do that. Let me tell you some of the things that we talked about. And then late this afternoon, Lisa did drop off a book that I haven't had time to look at, Managing Community Cats, a guide for municipal leaders on cats. It's got nice pictures of cats, and there's plenty of stories in here that talk about some of the things that Lisa, Stacy, and I talked about on the phone. And I will get through that, and if possible, I will see if we can get you a scanned copy of the contents of that book. So what we did talk about is that you can get a trap or traps from the Humane Society, and you can trap feral cats and take those out to the shelter. And they then will test them for feline leukemia. If the cat has feline leukemia, then it does have to be euthanized. But if not, then they will spay or neuter that cat, and when it's ready to go back out, they will let you take it back and release it. But they don't take cats in that are healthy feral cats and just euthanize them. They won't do that. And it talks about that in that magazine, but I just read like the first paragraph. They did mention, and I had thought about this in different times. We've learned about things that we've done ecologically in our country and in our world that has kind of upset the balance of things. And what they did mention is that we should keep in mind that these feral cats do help control mice, they help control chipmunks, they help control rats and other rodents. So I understand their pain. And one of the other things that was brought up that I couldn't address in detail, but Mr. O'Donnell can, I knew we recently had cited and had a trial, or just?
It was a plea.
Okay. Before Judge Roars, and maybe you ought to just take it from there. So we had a case.
Right, and I mean, it was a property owner in Westgate, one of our more serious cases that we took over to the court, to the municipal court. He pled, the maximum fine for something like that is $150 for a minor misdemeanor. He pled, and a few months later, I believe I may have told you this story, he attempts to bring the carcass of a dead cat in a bag into the courthouse to prove what happens when we charge him under these code provisions. So a lot of times you're not, with all these nuisances, you're not just dealing with just a lawbreaker. There's more going on upstairs, or more not going on upstairs, as may be the case. It's a symptom of a greater problem.
I will say that when Lisa and Stacy both talked about this feline leukemia, and I kind of like cats, but I'll be honest with you, I'm allergic to them. So's my wife, so we don't do the cat thing. We have kids with cats, and we go over to their house, and Lori and I sneeze, and our eyes water, and we say goodbye. But when you have groups of cats together, this feline leukemia evidently can be transmitted, maybe like COVID. And so when one gets it, multiple cats can get it, and it's not a good thing. But what Sean and I have talked about different times, and we get the occasional complaint too about people feeding cats, and that is against our code. And I would refer you if you go to the city's website and to the government tab, and then down to ordinances, and then use any kind of a keyword. You can use cat, you can use, I wouldn't recommend cats, just cat, dog, leash. it talks about in the 505 area about the various things on animal bites and leash laws and all that good stuff. But how do you prove that an individual is feeding cats? And what I think we were able to do with maybe some police work with the case you just talked about.
Yeah, it was Bill Dirk able to snap some pictures of the individual having the dishes out in front of his house, no fence or anything like that. I believe he even caught images of him pouring the food out there and leaving it. And in section 505.01 of our code, 505.02 says no owner or keeper of an animal shall permit it to run at large. And then 505.01 defines keeper as a person who exerts control over the animal, and that includes furnishing it with food, water, shelter, etc. So we do have to prove that. And once we prove that, we can prosecute the individual, and we have and we will continue to do that. I think what Mayor you're getting at is that takes care of the wrongdoer, but it's more what do we do with the cats that are still running around at large is the greater question.
Lisa and Stacy both, and I believe this book, say the solution is indeed spay neuter, and of course not feed. You know, if any of us people, if we plant things around our house that deer like, we're liable to attract deer. If we plant things that bunnies like, we're liable to attract bunnies. If we put cat food out, we're liable to attract cats, probably some raccoons, and other things. So feeding is not a good idea. So that's kind of where we're at. I think at this point, to be honest with you, what I would like to do is get back with Stacy and Lisa, if I have your blessing, and invite them to a meeting sometime in the future and see what they have to say.
Mayor, I think probably sooner the better on that,
Okay,
my opinion.
right. They're more than willing to come. Lisa's been in and met with Border Control on different things at different times, so. And Stacy was very enthusiastic. Stacy's been there a long time. God bless her. I mean, well, God bless all those people that work out there at the Humane Society. But yeah, I will get that set up, and we can do some kind of a study session. Or
Probably the way I would do it, Mayor, is and if you're ready for legislation, you can do a study session. You could also do it as a special guest. Speaking on a matter of public interest. That way you can do it towards the beginning of the council meeting.
That's what we'll do then. I'll get with Ms. Elders once I get with Lisa and Stacy, and we'll get a date set and we'll put it on the agenda. We'll do her. Any more questions for me?
I believe that book is available online too.
Is it?
I can
Okay.
shoot you a link to that if you want to share that. Then.
We'd love to do that. Thank you. Yep. It does look like there's some good articles. Common sense articles. Beyond that, I guess I feel compelled a little bit to talk about everything that went on Sunday with the water break, and I thought about Sunday, what we would say tonight, and thought about it a little bit more yesterday. And then at 10:34 last evening, received an email from Joe Ewers. I think you all know Joe, younger fella that works out at our water plant. His title's assistant superintendent. Around here, we refer to him as Smilin' Joe. And because, although we haven't seen his smile until recently, we enjoy having him around. And frankly, his grandfather taught me basketball officiating many years ago. Most coaches don't think I learned anything. I'm just going to read you the letter he wrote because I think it's nice. And it starts out, hello, BOC. Obviously, at this time, you have seen or heard that the boil advisory was lifted. I had a couple of things that I hope you share with people when you talk to people or see any of the people I'm about to mention. I know I may seem like a rah-rah guy sometimes, but Mayor, you said it on Friday, that sometimes we need to acknowledge our successes more often. This is a time to grab a positive out of a negative. It is never ideal or a good day when you have to issue a boil advisory. And let me just say, in one of my conversations with Adam McDowell on Sunday was, Mayor, I was really hoping that I would get through my tenure as the superintendent without a boil advisory, but at that point, we knew that it was going to happen. To issue a boil advisory, and we take that decision extremely seriously. First, we are thankful for everyone's, citizens and consumers' patience and understanding through this event, and we are. We worked very hard on Sunday to not let it get to that point, but we were unable to. And for as long as a 40-hour period as it was, because of the hard work and dedication of many people, that's all that we had. Rob Sarrigan and his crew, Andy Mannon, Lincoln Sarrigan, Ron Dingus, Jamie Aiden, Chris Potash, and J.D. Hahn worked tirelessly all day long. Several of them were in from 5 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock that night. To help get the issue resolved, working through 85-degree temperatures without a notion of hesitation. Rob was the first one here, meaning at the water plant, and one of the last ones to leave, and led his group like the city needed him to. Adam and our group here at the water plant, also did an awesome job of handling the entire day. Much like Rob, Adam was one of the first ones in and one of the last ones to leave. Very appreciative of the support he gave us all day and the patience he showed in making difficult decisions with implications that go beyond the water plant and the city of Defiance. The staff here that day did everything that was asked of them and more, doing much of the work without being told to do so. Jeff Mack, Zach Rasisa, Bobby Vance, and Rick Griffith were amazing for us on Sunday, whether it was assisting distribution with the work site, answering the hundreds of phone calls, or collecting samples. They rocked. Very thankful that those people answered the call to come help us get through the situation, but also serve the community. Once again, I just wanted to recognize all of those that stepped up when we needed them to. I learned a great deal from Rob and Adam that day, watching them work together when they don't normally do that. They work together, but they don't work together. Just kind of misled us. Both crews were awesome and showed no reluctance when doing the work. It was a tough day for the city and the water departments, but also a good day. It showed the best thing about us and our people. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks, Joe Ewers. So that was directly from Joe. I don't think I can say it any better. A couple more names I think I should add. The guy to my right here, Jeff Leonard, was out on this all day communicating with me what was going on, and even was selected to go out to the splash pad mid-afternoon on Sunday and announced to everyone there that we were going to have to shut it down because we need to limit the amount of water we were using. And it's a tough sell at 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon to a bunch of young people and their parents, that, especially those that came out of town, we were going to have to shut things down, but that was a wise decision at the time. And Jeff was constantly sending information to Debbie Stevens, our assistant, who was getting that out on Nixle, who was putting it on Facebook, who was putting it on our website. We were trying to get a hold of folks at the radio station. The newspaper put a headline on their homepage. I understand that there are people that don't have the ability to receive Nixle messages, don't have access to our website, don't have access to the Crescent News' website, and all of those things. I don't know how we deal with that. I really don't. It's just short of a town crier. I just don't. I don't know how we can do any better than what we did getting the information out. And that's all I have, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the comments. I will say one thing about that incident that I think you have to remember and keep in mind with any incident that happens. And that is that the reason I think these people are so good at what they do is that we sort of never rest on our laurels here. I mean, it is constantly self-evaluating. I've already set up a meeting on this incident to see what went right, what went wrong, what could we do better. And it's just a constant always self-evaluation of the things that people go through and pinpointing what could have been done better, what did we do good, how did it work, and we'll do that with this situation. So I think Joe Ewers is right in his letter. I think that we do have a great bunch of people that work for us. They step up when it needs to be. People need to step up, and I think it's just what makes a small community like ours great. They're at their best when their back's against the wall. So my compliments to them as well. That's it.
Thank you. Ms. O'Donnell?
Mr. President, I'd like to request an executive session from council to consider the purchase of property for public purposes. Ohio Revised Code, section 121.22 G2.
All right. So we have a request for an executive session. Do we have a motion for executive session this evening? Mr. Engel?
Second.
Second. Mr. Mast?
She ain't here. Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Mast?
Yes.
And Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
After citizens' concerns, we can have an executive session. Anything else?
Now that you mention it, yes, I'd like to request an executive session to consider confidential information related to the marketing plans, specific business strategy, production techniques, trade secrets, or personal financial statements of an applicant for development assistance, where that information is directly related to a request for economic development assistance that involves public infrastructure improvements that are directly related to an economic development project. Ohio Revised Code, section 121.22 G8.
So a second executive session request. Do we have a motion for executive session?
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Corbett?
I'll second.
Second, Mr. Hancock?
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
Mr. Mast?
Yes.
And Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
All right. And a second executive session before we adjourn this evening. Anything else?
I don't have any other
right.
requests. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Leonard?
Excuse me, I have nothing else at this time.
Thank you. We do have one item of legislation for discussion this evening. Would you read the caption?
Yeah.
As elders.
Second reading by caption only, an ordinance awarding a professional service contract for the design of Commerce Drive extension and declaring emergency.
You know what, it's kind of a toss-up who wants to handle this. I'd be happy to. I won't have a lot to say. This is an ordinance we brought last week. It was, it failed in its attempt to suspend and call the three readings. However, I think there's a lot to talk about on this topic, and it'll be largely covered actually by the two executive sessions that Mr. O'Donnell has already called for. So I think I had communicated that to council earlier, and if it's council's wishes to just give this its second reading, the administration is would be fully behind that decision.
Thank you. Well put. Are there any questions or wishes of council? Mr. Engel?
Just motion to let lie.
We have a motion to let lie. Second, Mr. Wexler. All in favor of letting this issue lie for this evening, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, we'll let this lie, come back for a third reading in 2 weeks, and have a discussion during executive session today. Well, that was the only item of legislation up for discussion this evening.
Mr. President.
Yes.
I did have a couple of questions or items. The area on Perry Street that had the fire, has there been any updates on when they are starting to do that?
Jackson Street.
In Jackson.
Jackson,
They're
I'm sorry,
working on
Jackson.
Working on
Are
it
they?
Yep.
Okay. And the other one was there on Clinton, the Haver building. Have you heard any updates on that area?
July, they were here today.
Okay.
I want to say July 14th. I'll email you that for sure.
If you would,
Yep.
thank you. That was just came to mind. I remember Matt, someone asking.
Yep.
So, thank you.
Yep, good catch. Thank you. Unless we have citizens' concern. Were there any emails or messages? All right, then we can stretch our legs for a few minutes and